Shaping is an idea that comes from the field of applied behavior analysis, and it basically means changing behaviors in small steps over a long period of time versus thinking about what's that one intervention or what's that one way to stop or change that behavior immediately. So it's this idea of changing behavior in really small steps over time.
I teach severely cognitively impaired young people, 15 to 19-year-olds. And the particular young man that we were having trouble with was a young man that was transitioning from another classroom into my room. And upon arrival, he would kick staff, slap, attempt to harm us in any way that he could, break windows, some property destruction, and overall just really struggling with that new transition to my classroom. And so we found out pretty early on that the option of letting him go home lessened his stress with all of that, and he was able to then leave the building, and he would come back the next day so we could basically just try again. So that was that beginning piece of him having a very difficult time transitioning to our room.
So the one thing that we do in looking at how to change behavior, the first step we take is what's the function or what purpose does it serve for the student? What's driving that behavior? And for this student, when Alexis said he wanted to go home, that was really something we wanted to cue in on, because there's only two possible functions in all of psychology. One is to escape or get away from something. The other is to obtain or get something. So when she identified that he wanted to go home, that was really important, because what she was identifying was the function, what was driving the behavior. This student was trying to escape the environment.
We really were trying to accomplish of him being able to stay at school and to come to his new classroom, to do it safely, because clearly he was having a very difficult time. And we knew that at that point he was not being safe at all for anyone that he was coming in contact with. So our goal was to just try to get him to transition to the classroom, accept that that was his new placement here in the building, and to be safe while doing it.
Well, instead of trying to get the behavior to stop right away or change that immediately, what we look at is how do we replace the behavior? So I'll give you an example. The student that we were looking at, the team, Alexis and her team, identified that the student was trying to escape or leave the building. What we would say in behavioral terms was that the student was escaping or leaving the building, but he was doing it in an inappropriate or an unsafe way. Kick out windows, get sent home. Punch staff, get sent home. So he's escaping because of these behaviors, but he's doing it in an inappropriate way. So what we look at doing is replacing the behavior, which means instead of just trying to get him to stop escaping, we look at how can he do that appropriately? How can he do that safely? And then we build from there. So the very first thing we had to do was look at how do we help this student leave the building appropriately? This is a student that's nonverbal, can't communicate. So the tricky part for teachers, one of the first things that we suggested was we present him with a choice of staying in the building when he first got there or going home. And we presented that on a visual card, because our first step was to replace the behavior in a very safe way. He was punching, kicking out windows. These were all unsafe things. The first step of many was for him to be able to leave in an appropriate way. He could choose the card to go home, and he simply exited the building. So making this a safe situation was our first step.
We knew he had a specified time of when he would arrive. So we knew by about 9:30 in the morning he would be coming in, and so we prepped ourselves with a visual schedule for him, to where one side said home, had a card, support for home, a visual support, and the other side was school. And so that was pretty well just that beginning stages of him knowing that he had the choice. If he came in and was full of anxiety and he couldn't move forward, then he simply needed to show us the home card, and we would honor that communication that he then needed to go home.
Well, what we did in terms of shaping is we predetermined the behavior. So we said this student was escaping, he was doing that inappropriately. The first step was to teach him how to leave appropriately by using the card, yes, by actually going home and leaving the building. But we only did that because we knew the next step then was for him to stay maybe a minute maybe 2 minutes, and then present him with the card to leave or stay in the building, present him with the two choices. Eventually it got to the point where he then hung up his coat, came in the room for a minute, and then was presented with the choices. Stayed for 5 minutes and then was presented. So it's a very counterintuitive part. It's difficult for us to kind of wrap our heads around, but we think when we think about shaping, we think about the desired behavior we want to see, and we change it in these really, really small steps over time.
That really was set up so he would come to understand that that was the safest way of how he could get his needs met. He could understand by giving us that home card that that was the appropriate way and the safe way to get himself home and out of that situation.
What helped the most was, and she would say the same thing, it was hard for them to kind of wrap their head around this idea of sending the student home. And we had to help her understand that we were going to send him home initially, bring him in the building longer over time. And the other thing we were going to do is meet every 2 weeks to say, are we actually meeting our goal? Is he staying longer? So we met on a very regular basis, and that's exactly what we saw. Once the team kind of said, okay, we're just taking this in steps, we're not really sending him home, we're just starting there so we can be safe. The next step, or the next big idea that we're going to reinforce for, is gradually adding time in the classroom, or gradually adding time with Alexis.
Initially, it was really difficult for us to accept that that was really the best choice, was to let him go home. Everyone really didn't understand. Regular staff, our classroom staff, parents were really not understanding why we were putting it together that way, but that was what we felt was necessary to get that point across to him. One of the things we started once he accepted that he could go home, and we were doing that safely, and he was no longer in that aggressive state, then we really worked on showing him what were the next steps of our schedule in our day. It was, hanging up your coat and your backpack, let's come see the classroom, say hello to staff, and at first he would just stand outside the door and kind of peer in and look and kind of check it out. And then we would present him with a visual schedule. It was definitely something that he needed. And we were trying to read him at the best we could to know when we really needed to kind of make sure that home card was visual, so he knew that he still had that ability to go if he couldn't handle that situation. So we just step by step worked to increase his day from that point on.
Alexis and her team continue to meet every 2 weeks, and once they started looking at the behavior in small steps, gradually adding time, they knew what to do. They came up with all kinds of creative ways to add videos, preferred activities, actually did some academic work with the student and gradually added time. And he ended up staying a full day with her by the end of that school year. It took her an enormous amount of time and a lot of work, but once they looked at this idea of shaping, they knew what to do. They were very creative about it, and the end result was the student safely stayed in the building or in the class for the full day.
As we worked along with this process, it was slow going. It was an extra 5 minutes, an extra 10 minutes. It really was that slow for this particular young man, but we knew that we had to do that for everything and everyone to be safe and it to be a positive experience for him. So we worked together with all of our staff here. We met with parents, every couple of weeks to make certain that we were kind of staying forward with our plan and that we were always moving to provide things in his schedule that we knew he would enjoy, because that would then help him become more comfortable and be able to stay longer throughout his day. So it took a long time, but it really was the best possible solution that we had to have him be here and have it be a positive experience for everybody. The student actually ended up working through, he arrived at 9:30 still every day. He was pretty hard, to that schedule of arriving at 9:30, but we did get him to stay till 2 o'clock every day. And so the whole process honestly took about 9-10 months by the time it really was a complete full day for him to be here and to be part of a classroom and part of his school building. He just needed to get beyond those real difficult moments.